Bad news. You are a young man in pre-revolutionary France, and you are intent on speaking truth to power, or at least, to the people to whom that power usually lies. Good news. You have a bit of money. You also live outside France proper. You see, your great-grandparents were Huguenots, French Protestants, who fled France to evade the persecutions of the so-called Sun King. Good thing they've managed to land on their feet, otherwise you wouldn't have the cash for the printing press right now. Your location means you can live without fear of the censor, or the Bastille, whatever you write. However, what exactly are you going to write? Now, that's a question. The French public is hungry for well-informed articles on political matters, both at home and abroad. These people are heartily sick of court gazettes writing about that time the royal family had gone to mass, again. How are you going to get the news in question? Option 1. Bribe some low-ranking secretary at a foreign embassy. Or, better yet, a few. These guys are paid peanuts. They would gladly tell you what they know. Though, how reliable that would be is another question. Disgruntled army officers can also work. Option 2. Maintain a paid correspondent in Paris, or Brussels, or Vienna, or St. Petersburg, or all of these, if you have the budget for it. That would be more expensive, but not as expensive as you might think. You won't be their only source of income, so they won't expect you to pay them a proper full salary. You can economize too. Tell your Hamburg correspondent to gather news from all the Baltic states, for instance. In exchange, these people would send you regular digests with the top local news, which you would then have to turn into editorial gold. Option 3. Go all the way to the top. It's been known for the King of Poland, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson alike to supply newspapers with exclusive information. However, for that, you'd already have to have some standing, and besides, you don't really think any of these people would be an impartial source, do you? Now, your news gathered and your articles written. No fancy headlines, mind you. You'd have to live for more than half a century longer to see those. How do you put them together? You can't do it yourself. You'll need 6 or even 8 people working together to set the type and print your issue. They'd expect decent treatment from you too. 1 or 2 days off straight after the new issue had been printed, good wages, and retirement pay. By the standards of the century, it was one of the better industries to be working in. How do you get your ready copies into the hands of the subscribers? And you need a lot of subscribers, mind you. The golden age of advertising has not yet arrived, so you are unlikely to get more than 3% of your income from ads. To take the copies to the border, you can use your country's regular postal service. Maybe negotiate a proper contract with them. While you can, you are going to be using them a lot, after all. After that, dedicated agents and distributors in France would take over. Though, of course, you'd need to agree with them beforehand, too. Actually, there is this bookseller in the capital by the name of David, probably no relation to the future revolutionary painter. Probably. His Bureau Général des Gazettes Étrangères sells the papers in Paris both by subscription and through street vendors, and even ships the copies bound for the French provinces. He even issues regular prospectuses listing all the newspapers he handles, their prices, and the days on which they arrive. Just because your kind of journalism is illicit, it doesn't mean it's shoddily organized. Now, your first issue out, you can relax. For 3 days, because after that, your readers would be expecting the next one. Good luck. What if you hadn't had the good fortune of living beyond the grasp of the crown, though? What if you were actually born in the very heart of the realm, in the capital? Well, in that case, your choice would be either illicit pamphlets or handwritten periodicals. So, unlike in your alternate incarnation, you are a subversively minded French journalist who actually does live in France. Well, that's tough. However, all is not lost. Yes, you probably won't be able to start your own newspaper here. The royal power is keen on censorship and only grants respective privileges to thoroughly loyal publications. However, there is another format available to you, namely, the pamphlets. Now, what are the pamphlets? You've likely heard the word, but what does it actually signify? For starters, it's not a synonym of a periodical. They are not regular publications, but rather one-off responses to particular events. That fact gives them the kind of sharp topicality that a regular newspaper relying on subscriptions might not always possess. They can be very long indeed, but more usually they take the form of thin octavo booklets, quite distinct from books and magazines. And, attention, this part is important for you. They are cheap to produce. You don't need to spend your hard-earned livres on leasing a proper establishment of your own and buying a printing press. There are dedicated existing printers of pamphlets who can help you. Yes, their type would be likely second-hand and their press would be looking like something that was broken thrice and then cobbled together. But think of the expense you'd save. Now, of course, the public is willing to overlook the clumsy production because the topics you'd be acquainting them with would be sharp and urgent. Which topics would that be? Well, what is the political crisis du jour? Are the Jesuits being expelled from the realm? Write about their shocking dishonesty and patchy track record in advising kings, or take the other side and decry the expulsion as a destruction of great patrons of learning. Are the parlements of whatever provinces pitting themselves against the royal power? It happens surprisingly often. Take the side of these brave souls guarding the kingdom against royal caprices, or remind the public that their members are all wealthy noblemen are usually guarding themselves against the need to pay taxes. Is there a new royal mistress? Well, that topic never gets old. Granted, the young Louis XVI is somewhat disappointing in that regard. He seems to have no interest in touching even his own wife, but most of the ladies who had warmed his late predecessor's bed are still fresh in people's memories. A vivid biography of one of them, perhaps, expose the corruption of the court, the rot in the heart of Versailles? A worthy topic, but the kind of pill people swallow better when it is sweetened with tales of fleshly delights and luxurious gowns. Some things never change. Is it any time after 1787? You simply have to write in defense on calling the Estates General. Someone has to. After all, the actual powers at the top prevaricate as usual, and might need just a little push in the form of the public opinion. Or a big push. I might sound flippant, but I really am quite serious. It is to the pamphlet writers of the last 3 decades that we owe the wide spread of such concepts as citizen, liberty versus despotism, the rights of man, and even republicanism. Yes, there had been great and earnest tomes discussing them all, but is an average person on the street likely to read several volumes of encyclopedia, and these aren't cheap, or to gulp down a few pamphlets, and these actually are. As for production, no, don't print it here in Paris. First of all, it would be hard to find a printer willing to take it on, and second, the City Guild of Printers and Booksellers is keeping a dead medieval grip on, well, printers and booksellers. Frankly, you better send the text out to be printed in Avignon. It's a French city, all right. But due to one old quirk of medieval history, it is still considered to be technically a papal enclave. Yes, you've heard that right. The Catholic Church is a more lenient and less censorious overlord than the French monarchy you were born under. And then people are asking, why do you need the whole Estates General thing? So, on to distribution. The simplest method is doing that through peddlers, colporteurs. These people crucial for disseminating popular literature, as well as new decrees and judicial memoirs, a surprisingly well-selling genre in both cities and the countryside. They also evade the police easily, since they have no fixed premises. But suppose a few booksellers grew interested in your oeuvre. They would quietly refer to it as a chestnut, an industry code for illicit publications. They would insert requests for such things on separate, unsigned scraps of paper or mark dangerous titles with a cross. Books are married, sheets of one stuffed into another, to conceal them, or hidden in the bottom of crates or packing material. Think of all the tales of intrepid smuggling you've ever read. Well, you'll be doing something like that now, but with pamphlets. Due to the expenses associated with all of these difficulties, it is not unknown for forbidden pamphlets to cost quite a lot, though, mind you, still within the reach of skilled workers. Now, suppose you do actually want to own your own regular publication. What then? Well, you can always write it out by hand. No, I am not joking. We have come to the third and final option. In order to evade the censorship of the crown, you can resort to the form of media that had been flourishing, in Paris at least, since the mid-18th century. Namely, the Nouvelles à la main, or, simply put, handwritten newsletters. Since you will not have the resources of, say, your counterpart from Part 1, your sources are going to be rather modest. No diplomats or heads of state are going to entrust you their secrets. Instead, you would have to keep your ears open in popular cafes and bribe maidservants from the servants' quarters of the houses of the great and good. Just make sure not to believe everything you hear. Note the example of Marie Anne Dublé, this proprietress of a semi-legendary news sheet. When her employees brought her the raw news from the sources above, she wrote them down in 2 columns, credible news and dubious rumors. Then she, as later centuries would have called it, fact-checked both by discussing them with her circle of trusted and well-informed friends. They jokingly called themselves her parishioners, as though she were a priestess of some new religion. Only afterwards did the worthy news get written down. Mind, her articles were often written with far more liberty than a proprietor of, say, the respectable Gazette de Leyde would have allowed himself. Even crowned heads were not immune. For example, one of these news sheets wrote about counterfeit French coins with Louis XVI's portrait, decorated with the headdress that the eternal God gave to Moses. And another praised Frederick the Great's successor for abstaining from orgies and touching women since ascending the throne. No wonder the powers that be had once tried to have Madame Dublé committed to a convent. Thankfully, they failed. Hopefully, you will be just as lucky. You cannot compete even with the early printing press in terms of the volume of production. However, you will be able to compete with it in terms of speed. After all, your newsletter can be finished on Sunday, copied on Monday, and the first copies of it sold of Tuesday. You don't need to send your writings to, say, the faraway Avignon to be printed. Besides, don't underestimate the power of fans. The copies of your copies might end up circulating outside Paris, or even outside the country. News are unlikely to be your paper's only attraction. Look at the Bachomont newsletter, for instance. Its content is often worldly, gossipy, spiced with witticisms about actresses and men about town, reviews of plays, books, and art exhibits, sympathetic to Voltairean enlightenment. Or, look at the author of the Maître, whoever they are. Sure, he or she are known for their startling anti-clericalism, but they also combine a manuscript news service with a printed literary bulletin known as the Correspondance Secrète. However, don't imagine a state of perfect freedom. The police of the kingdom is not stupid. It is aware of the existence of most nouvelles, and frequently vets them too. The police had ways of tracing and pressuring manuscript nouvellistes, just as they do with the publishers of printed newspapers. In other words, be careful. I wouldn't want you to be reduced by these people to frivolous topics and empty flattery for fear of your life.